Sounds like football, baby.
What up, folks? Welcome back into the Fantasy Football Smackdown. It is Monday night, June 7th, recording this. I'm your host, Kyle August. You can follow me on Twitter at KyleMonth8. With me, as always, the co-host, Fantasy Football Smackdown, the excellence of execution. It's Jake. Rip your heart out. Jake Rip. What up, Jake?
Dude, what's going on?
Dude, good to have you back. We just recorded last Thursday because of the weird Memorial Day schedule, so it's a quick turnaround for us. But we are pleased to be joined by a third member of the crew tonight. You know him as Addison Hayes at AmazeHayes _. I know him as the man with the worst Girl Scout cookies takes in all of America. What up, Addison?
Oh man, you really went right into it at the beginning, huh?
We can't let you off the hook. Anytime I see you, I'm just like, damn, that guy doesn't know Girl Scout cookies.
That's all right. I can scoop them all up because I know every time I go up to a Girl Scout stand, they got a whole box of those shortbreads because nobody wants them, and I'm like, yo, give me like half of that box.
They're never out of stock. That is for
Kyle,
sure.
Though, Kyle's wanted to talk about weird takes, Mr. Crackling Oats brand series.
Hey, calm down, man. That's forever my best take on this show of all time. So
the remnants.
The remnants.
Yes.
We've had some fun over the last year or so doing this. We've been on the podcast, the three of us together, probably at least 3 times, maybe 4. But I wanted to have Addison on with us tonight because we talked some draft strategy. We kind of kicked this series off last week, talking 0 RB, looking at what 2021 redraft will look like if you go with that. So Jake and I talked about that last week. If you missed the podcast, it dropped a little bit later in the week. So check that back out if you missed it. We did a quick mock draft with that strategy right afterwards as well. So we went through and how that would actually look if you wanted to go 0 RB in 2021. So if you missed that, go back. And obviously stay subscribed for all of the Dynasty Warzone Network shows. But wanted Addison on here because we're going to continue some draft strategy a little bit here. We're going to jump into auction as Jake, Addison, and I were in a startup Dynasty auction this last Saturday. It was a ton of fun. We did this over on Reality Sports Online. And this was the first time that Jake or Addison had done an auction on RSO, and it was Jake's first ever auction. So we're going to get their takes on how this thing went down. And I always like doing this because, it gives a fresh perspective. We're just a couple days removed, but anyone that's out there waiting to take a dive into auction, you're going to get a kind of a firsthand experience through these two. It's going to be a lot of fun. But before we do that, I think we just got to talk about the Julio Jones news. Sunday, Julio Jones dealt to the Tennessee Titans. Jake, you're obviously our resident Falcons fan here, so I'm just gonna hand the reins over to you. What was your initial thoughts as a Falcons fan before we kind of get into the fantasy ramifications here?
As a Falcons fan, naturally, I don't know, man. Like, I'm still a little bit bummed. At least, Shannon Sharp kind of softened the blow when he spilled the beans kind of last week when Julio said live on the air that he's already out of Atlanta. But and there we go. Now the Band-Aid's ripped off, and this Tennessee offense, it's going to be scary, man. I mean, I don't know so much about that defense, but for fantasy purposes, I'll take whatever piece of that Tennessee offense I can get. I know you and I have been kind of like ish on Ryan Tannehill. I guess I could say it that way.
Yeah.
I'm all in now. I want every bit of Ryan Tannehill. I think this is amazing for Derrick Henry. Can you imagine defenses? They go from, stack the box and this guy's going to run for 2,000 yards and 20 touchdowns against you. That's not happening anymore now with these 2 wide receivers split up on either ends and A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. So I'm excited to see how things go in Tennessee. I'm not so excited about Atlanta, but who knows, man? I mean, Kyle Pitts looks like it's nothing but wheels up for him going forward, huh?
And of course, this comes down in early June, which was part of the cap, structure and how they had to wait out and do this. But obviously, the majority of us already threw rookie drafts. So if you got Kyle Pitts in, hell, some people would say at the 101, that's just a perfect value for him going right out of the gate. Going to be the number 2 target in that offense. Addison, you got the vintage Corey Davis, I believe, is that behind you there. So
that is.
So we got the Corey Davis replacement now. in Tennessee as they make a upgrade of sorts to get Julio Jones. What was your thoughts when you heard this news come down?
I mean, first off, finally, as somebody without a horse in the race in this one in terms of fandom on either side, I would just, from a fantasy football side, I was like, man, is Julio Jones going to get traded today? Can he get traded today so we can just move on and talk about this? Because these rumors have been swirling since before the NFL draft, and they really started to pick up over the last week or so. And so first, finally, was really my first reaction. Yeah, I mean, this is wheels up for Calvin Ridley. I jumped on the Kyle Pitts train really hard over the past couple of days. Was something that I was kind of against, at least initially. But if you move past the tight end designation, I really think that this is going to be Kyle Pitts as the wide receiver 2 for the Atlanta Falcons. He's going to be on the outside across from Calvin Ridley. That allows Hayden Hurst to still be more of the traditional inline tight end. And if that's the case, Matt Ryan's still going to throw probably 600 times a year because he's done that over the past 3 years. And there's really nothing that's going to change, I think, offensively for that offense. And so Kyle Pitts could realistically see 100+ targets in year one. And I think he could be the most productive rookie pass catcher from this 2021 class, including being more productive than Jamar Chase, if not at least right there with Chase. So to have that type of production in your tight end slot is really the route and the situation that we were looking for Kyle Pitts to become this next, Jimmy Graham, Rob Gronkowski, Travis Kelce tight end as a difference maker on your roster. So this is just wheels up for, I think, everybody on the Falcons offense in terms of pass catching. And then Tennessee, I think it's just kind of status quo for AJ Brown in terms of what he's already been doing. Yeah, I mean, it kind of sucks that he's not going to get, like 175 or more targets, but, he was still a wide receiver 2 last year with 110 targets or whatever it was in 14 games. Don't think that really changes. I think Julio Jones is still going to be fine as a wide receiver 2. Derrick Henry obviously is just going to do it all again. I was trying to find, I saw some random, I guess it was a random person. I didn't really know who it was, but he posted a stat on how are you going to stop this Titans offense? And he had, are you going to, try to stop AJ Brown and Julio Jones, only have 6 men in the box? Cause that's Derrick Henry's, he eats there and has only seen that over like a very small percentage of his actual runs over the past couple of years. That's some insane yards per carry against 6 men in the box. 7 men in the box. AJ Brown has some ridiculous, like over 4 yards per route run against 7 men in the box. And then if you have 8 men in the box to stop Derrick Henry, that means you have single coverage on Julio Jones and you're screwed. So, I mean, it's just, it's going to be insane what that offense is going to be able to do and how you're really going to be able to stop it. They honestly could get into scoring, battles with Kansas City, with Baltimore, and even, if they make it to the Super Bowl with Tampa Bay or Green Bay, if Aaron Rodgers is still there, they could be a really high-powered offensive team scoring-wise.
It's going to be interesting for sure when not just because of the names that, and how it shook out here, but when you factor in as well, part of the reason that, Jake kind of alluded to it, I was pretty down on Tannehill. Jake and I were both, had him down in our rankings. I had him blacklisted on a show that we did earlier this offseason just because, man, I just didn't see it. I didn't, he was losing targets. They didn't add anybody until this weekend. And he lost Arthur Smith, right, who goes to Atlanta, weirdly enough. And then they ship Julio Jones back to Tennessee. So here's a few quick notes, kind of how I landed on this, so again, factoring in the offensive coordinator change, there's a little bit of unknown with Tennessee. You also look at the fact their defense kind of declined a bit last year, despite Vrabel, being at the helm there. But Ryan Tannehill was 18th in pass attempts last season. He had the 4th highest touchdown percentage. That, with addition of 7 rushing touchdowns, he was obviously a stud once again for fantasy purposes. 33 passing touchdowns for him. Addison nailed it. AJ Brown had 106 targets in 14 games. That was 21st among wide receivers, and he still was putting up production. 7.5 targets per game. Weirdly enough, Corey Davis had exactly 1 less target per game. He had 92 targets in 14 games as well. And we saw Corey Davis put up, he was definitely usable, and we all agree that Julio Jones is a talent upgrade over Corey Davis in that offense. So, on the Tennessee side, I'm RIP to all my Josh Reynolds shares I've been acquiring over the last few weeks. But yeah, for me, Tannehill, definitely, I'm a believer now. I'm with you, Jake. He was outside the top 15 for me just because there were some other guys I liked with upside, but he moves it into the top 10 for me at QB this season. A.J. Brown, I think, stays status quo. I think Addison nailed that. If anyone's freaking out on A.J. Brown, go get him in Dynasty Leagues. He, like I said, he's been productive over his career so far on low target numbers. Julio, for me, did drop a few spots. I had him just outside the top 15. He's still wide receiver 2, but I jumped the Rams wide receivers over him and Michael Thomas. I just think that Julio's target numbers, he's not going to see 140, 150, targets like, he had in Atlanta in the past. So now when you're talking about low target numbers, a la A.J. Brown, you need touchdowns to go with that. And Julio hasn't necessarily done that over the course of his career.
Finally where we see Julio touchdown Jones.
I hope so, but he's a wide receiver 2 for me this season. So obviously I think whether you're talking dynasty or redraft, you kind of have to value him almost similarly because I'm not sure how long that window is. On the Atlanta side, Ridley, that is going to see even more looks, than people might have thought, a few weeks ago with 3 guys there. Now it's just back down to 2. Addison made some great points there, so I don't think I need to go too far into that, but I will throw this out there because I've seen a lot of these with and without Julio stats. So I'll break it down for you guys real quick. With Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley in 8 games, he averaged 8 targets, 5 receptions for 76 yards per game, averaging 15 fantasy points per game in half PPR. 7 games without Julio, he had 3 more targets a game. That was 11. He had 2 more catches per game, up to 7. His yardage jumped from 76 yards per game to 109. And his fantasy points per game went from 15 to 16.7 in half PPR. The only weird thing, if you really want to chop up all the numbers, is like the game with Julio actually included that weird ass game against Green Bay where Julio came back from injury. Ridley got the main coverage from Alexander and he was shut out. So if you take out that Green Bay game, Ridley's numbers are actually better with Julio. So you can really make these stats sing however you want. But I think ultimately what we're going to see is this is a team that's going to have to throw a ton. So I think Ridley's going to be great. But for me, Matty Ice, he pretty much swaps places with Ryan Tannehill. He was up in the top 10 with that Kyle Pitts maneuver. For me, he's back down. He is, for me, in my rankings, he dropped for me down to QB 18 behind Burrow, Cousins, and Big Ben. So I don't really love it.
Real quick on Ridley, I've seen some people on Twitter dancing around with the idea of potentially Calvin Ridley wide receiver 1 this season, like the wide receiver 1 this season. Yes, in play, you think?
I think it's in play for him. He's in
top 5 last year.
Yeah.
So
yeah, he was top 5 last year. So it's definitely there. It's a possibility for sure. I just the biggest thing that sucks for me with this whole thing is just I was really thinking that Matty Ice could bounce back. He had so many up and down games last year. I did take a look at this. With Julio Jones, he was averaging 19 fantasy points per game. That would have been QB 12. That's Kirk Cousins-esque last season. But without Julio Jones, he was at 15.7 points per game. That was QB 25. So I think with Pitts being there, that adds, it probably puts him somewhere in between. But man, I don't know if I feel extremely comfortable kind of setting and forgetting with Matty Ice as my QB for redraft this year. So last question I had for you, Jake, we've kind of been joking around about Kyle Pitts before this, that he was going like his, I believe in sleeper redraft ADP, he was 48th overall.
Yeah, you remember that
this
value.
Yes.
That value.
Would you take him in round 4 in redraft league?
No tight end premium.
No tight end premium. Just straight up.
No, it's still too scary for me, man. I'm sure I'll end up eating those words come week 1 when he sees 10 targets. And I mean, that won't surprise me at all. And what Addison's saying totally makes sense. Seeing him lined up as a receiver, I can see it all happening. But I mean, the players that are available in round 4, I'm going to have such a hard time taking the Kyle Pitts gamble with the kind of talent that's going to be still on the board. I'm with you, man. It just he's gonna outprice himself for me, and unfortunately, Kyle Pitts has been in the league for exactly
30 days or whatever, and I will just already know I will never own him in any leagues ever.
You know what? I would take him over Hawkinson for what that's worth. I don't know if that, I'm sure that's not hot takey at all after Julio Jones is gone, but he does move over Hawkinson in my rankings for me.
Where would he fall for you, Addison, in redraft for just this season? So we're talking about rookie production for Kyle Pitts. Are you taking him as high as 4? Is he better than Waller?
He's 5 for me. He's behind Kelsey, Kittle, Waller, and Hawkinson. I would still take Hawk.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Just because I think Hawk is going to have like 140 targets.
Yeah.
You know, like, so, and, but I would take the shot on Pitts over, you know, Andrews and Fant and like all those other guys. Cause I think if you're swinging for the fences at that point,
absolutely,
you know, Kyle Pitts could realistically be like a top 10 wide receiver in your tight end slot.
Yeah, nope, for sure. He definitely solidified himself for me as well. I bumped him up to tight end 4. So I think Hawkinson Pitts is going to be the debate. But I think just the upside now that Julio is gone, the targets are going to just be unbelievable. Yeah, and because of that reason too, I think Addison said it right. Like Pitts is the wide receiver too. I don't really care about any of these other names. If you want to take a shot on Russell Gage now in a deeper league, like I guess that's fine. But like
you can take worse swings than Russell Gage for what that's worth. But yeah,
like Josh Reynolds now. Oh, Josh Reynolds, what could have been? I have so many teams with him just stashed for this entire time, and I thought I made it through free agency, I made it through the draft, and little did I know it would be a June 5th trade or whatever.
I took him just this weekend too in that auction draft. I was like, oh, I got me a good one here in Josh Reynolds.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. I took Matty Ice, and we're gonna dive right into that that auction right here off the top. So I'll kind of set the table once again. We did a startup dynasty league on Reality Sports Online. So I'll for those of you who haven't played over at RSO, first off, we have no connection sponsorship. So I'm gonna kind of steer the conversation back to Addison and Jake to get their initial thoughts. Boys, don't hold back. Let me know your honest opinion on this, because positive, negative, whatever, we ain't getting anything from him anyway. But for those of you that may not be familiar with Reality Sports Online, honestly, is a great group of guys. They've always been really good to me over the years. I've done multiple leagues with them. They're really responsive. They try to make updates, corrections. They give you all the tools that you need as a commissioner. So there's definitely a ton of positives. On the other side of it too, this is a very unique way to play fantasy football, as the site provides you the ability to manage players with a salary cap and contracts. So it's dynasty-esque that you can expand your multi-year contracts as much as you want as the commissioner. And those contracts obviously carry over through the length of their duration, but you also have more players going into the pool year after year on expiring contracts. So it's dynasty from the standpoint of your roster is going to go and carry over time, but with a caveat that some contracts will expire. There will be players available to you that you would not have in a normal dynasty auction. So that's what we did this weekend. The three of us and a bunch of guys from the Warzone Patreon, a few other guys that we recruited into this thing, and most of which were all players doing this for the very first time as fantasy owners. So this is definitely again a unique thing to do. I will say this off the top as well. If you want to take a dive after listening to this conversation into Reality Sports Online, which I highly do suggest because it is one of my favorite formats, you need dedicated people that are willing to sit at a computer for very long periods of time, because this thing is not quick and you can't auto draft this thing. This is serious. So if you want to take the next level to your game, man, this is a great way to do that. But let's kick it to the guest first, I guess. Addison, what initially was your thoughts just on, I think you actually were the one that brought this up. Somehow you finagled me into running it. But what was your initial thoughts on how this was going to play out and your experience?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I recruited you because I heard you talking with Jerry on this podcast last year about y'all's experience with your RSO last year and Jerry's first experience and stuff. And RSO was always a format and, league hosting site that I wanted to get into for the first time, because I do think that it is very unique. It is salary cap and contract, which, you can definitely do on other sites as well, like MFL or I don't know how many other ones. Fantrax, I think, does it too. But this one is unique because the computer does it all for you. So that's very helpful. You don't have to do any behind the scenes work or math or whatnot. And doing more commissioner work. So the computer does it all for you and the system does it all. It adds in, the whole like franchise tag thing, the salaries getting increased per year as they go on and whatnot. So it's all extremely interesting and a very unique lifelike, situation and format. And what I love about it too, as well, and another note is it makes more players valuable, I think, because especially those older players or guys that you're not necessarily sure on, like Derrick Henry. I'm looking at, I tracked every single player and their value that they went for. And Derrick Henry went for a 1 year, $15.5 million deal, which, I mean, you're basically buying Derrick Henry for 2021, and then he's going to go to the free agency pool next year and we'll reevaluate where he's at. Same with Tom Brady. I won Tom Brady on a 2-year deal as one of my starting quarterbacks. That's, I think, really valuable because I feel very confident that Brady's going to be really good this year and potentially next year if he stays. So, it just makes those players more valuable than, if you're sitting there with like Myles Gaskin on your roster and you're like, man, I wish I could get like a second for him, but nobody's offering you a second because he's only got 2021 value. But if a team really needs him, and the contract's right, it works. So I really enjoyed the auction overall. I thought it was really, really fun. The only, I don't even call this a negative. This might be like a first world problem, or at least like my computer monitor, but like the auction room was like kind of small on my monitor, and I have like a big, like 23-inch. So it only took up about half the screen. So the only thing I wish it was a little bit bigger. So then all those little chat boxes and the player boxes and all that stuff was just a little bit bigger. That's my only negative. And I don't even call it a negative. My only like downside to what happened.
They say it's not about the size, though. It's how you use it.
There you go. Thank you, Jake.
We were all thinking it.
So I do want to get your guys' takes on your actual team. So we'll save some time for that too, to actually break down how your team looked, how your strategy actually played out, as you were moving through this. But Jake, what was your initial thoughts going into this thing? I know we kind of touched on it very briefly at the end of last show. You were like, man, I got no plan. So what were your initial thoughts and takeaways for your experience?
No, so when we when we signed off on that show, that was like the last thing I said. I was like, listen, I'm going into it zero prep. I'm just gonna wing it once I get in there. And luckily, as soon as we ended that show, you're like, listen, Jake, I'm gonna suggest that you go into the website, at least familiarize yourself with the draft room.
Yes, go to the website. That was my suggestion.
You're like, you are registered, right? You're anyway. So I went through. I did a few mocks. You know what? I'm glad I did that. That did help me. I like how they have set up in that room, like the 1 year contract, 2 year contract, 3 year contract, just like the quick hit buttons you can get at the top there. But even when you do those mock drafts, like it's hard to get a grip on, like it's totally different than when you're drafting with real people, I guess, than when you're doing it in their mock draft. Because when they're doing it, the players, as they're nominating them, they're coming off the board as if they're on like a rankings list. So like the first player that goes up, it's like, Christian McCaffrey goes for this much, and then it's going to go Saquon Barkley is going to go for a couple $1,000s less, and then it's going to be Dalvin Cook goes for a couple $1,000s less. Whereas you get in the actual real life thing, and then I'm ready for Christian McCaffrey to go on, and then Kyle nominates who was it?
Trevor Lawrence.
Trevor Lawrence goes first. I'm like, oh no, I'm derailed already. So right off the bat, I was going into thinking, okay, I'm gonna be very conservative for the first few rounds. See how these picks fall off the board. Maybe get a grip on player values. That's mainly how I approach the quarterback position. I saw that with Trevor Lawrence. I saw what price Pat Mahomes goes for. And then, guys, we talked about this a little bit before we went live, but and Addison, I think you brought this up. But when it kind of gets towards like the end of a tier, like teams start to get scared about these players, and the price really starts to get jacked up. So it's weird because it's not even like it's not like a snake draft where it's just the best player available is always going off in order. We had Pat Mahomes go for the same price as, Addison. I think you signed Joe Burrow for it.
Yeah, God, who would do that?
It was the same. It was the same exact price.
Yeah,
it was the same contract length, same amount of money. And I mentioned, I actually had that in my notes. I was like, Burrow was the last guy, like the way it
literally
the panned
last.
Out.
He was the last one.
Yeah, he was the last like elite quarterback of that tier. Yeah. And you had to pay up if you wanted him.
Patrick Mahomes' price. So If anybody wants that.
I wanted to ask you if you're just like super bullish on Joe Burrow, or if you just it was a total desperation, like I'm in trouble.
I did not want to be Kyle with his quarterback situation. I figured, I was like, listen, I need to get one of these young guys to put my 4-year deal on, and and looking back on it, like I'm so mad. Like I spent $24 million more than what Lamar Jackson went for. Like 22 mil more than what Lawrence went for, 10 mil more than what Kyler Murray and Josh Allen went for. And even 8 more than what Herbert went for. I'm like, man, like,
so were you gonna just not lose that bid? Like how far were you gonna take it? Like 100 million?
I probably would have stopped if he beat me. Like if he took it to 95, I probably was gonna stop. I was gonna be like, okay, this is more than Patrick Mahomes.
So we were talking in the, because we had about 2/3 of the league was in a Zoom call, so we were kind of chatting, and sometimes it'd get real silent in there. Like people are, you get serious and focused, but we all knew what the Mahomes contract was. So like as it's going up, we're like, oh man, it's getting there. And when it hit that mark, it was you and I, at least just one other guy, I think had that last like 15 bids. Like it just kept going and going and going. I was like, man, who's gonna balk first? It was a game of chicken.
That button is literally the exact lowest amount to beat the current high bid. Mm-hmm. So literally it's just a war between you and whoever's on the other screen in terms of who's going to be the last person to click this button. And so like literally it says, and it's a 10-second clock. So it's like 10, 9, and it goes all the way down to like 3 or 2 seconds. And then somebody clicks a button and it's like, okay, now we're at like 88.5. And then it goes another 8 seconds, 89, and then another 8 seconds, 89.5. You're like, stop, just like stop clicking the button. We got all the way up to freaking Patrick Mahomes, and I got Joe Burrow.
Well, and that's what makes it so fun, because honestly, like it's hard to, like when you're doing mock drafts. I'll just throw this out there as like, we'll kind of summarize at the end too, any like tips and stuff for you guys. But like I mentioned it to Jake ahead of time too. Like I highly suggest, like anytime you're doing an auction, even if you've done it on that site before, like get a feel for the room, whether you should be aware that screen is only going to be half filled with the, with how it's going to look, or how the buttons work, and how to bid, because you can definitely get, you want to know too, like how can you manually bid, as well. That's something like when you're clicking that button, all it takes is one person to jump that more than you wanted to. And if you click, half a second after it, you just outbid them. Right. So I would definitely say some good takeaways as these guys are kind of talking about their initial experiences, like get a feel for the room on the site, right? And it's hard to do mocks and get a feel for like how to spend, because every auction is different. It truly is. People say, but it really is. Like you're, depending on when the player is nominated, depending on how that tier has been falling, that we could do the same auction that we did on Saturday with the same group of guys tomorrow, and I guarantee the contracts would, while similar in nature, would be completely different, as far as, the spend, compared to what we have right now. So it's always fun to hear guys that are doing this for their very first time, especially on RSO. So I know Jake didn't really have a plan, I guess. So Addison, did you have a plan going in where you play, did you want to spend up on, stars and scrubs? Were you trying to stay balanced? And then in addition to that, did you actually, execute that plan?
So I had kind of a plan. My problem with this was I didn't trust the values that I had like pre-draft, just from rankings and whatnot. I didn't trust the values that we got from the mock draft, because I feel like those are always overinflated from the computer and stuff. So I didn't really know price point wise where these players were actually going to end up in terms of total contract numbers. Right. So that I didn't really have a plan for. I did kind of have an overall roster construction plan. Like you said, like I kind of had ideas in terms of where I wanted to allocate my 2 4-year deals, maybe some of my 3-year deals as well. And then was kind of ready to be fluid as the draft went in terms of how that went. And that's why I went really hard on Joe Burrow, is because I was like, I'm going to leave with one of these guys. And I chickened out on every other guy until eventually I paid Patrick Mahomes' price on Joe Burrow. But then, I just kind of went with the rest of the room. And like I said, as I was tracking through all these other player values, it kind of gave me a gauge for where some other guys might actually end up going. And trying to be more aggressive earlier in tiers. Cause, and that's my biggest takeaway from this whole entire thing. Like if I were to do this again, I would be attacking a lot earlier. I would be one of the first teams to be spending, my first couple of contracts, winning a couple of these players because, and I mean that the quarterback example that we ran through wasn't the only example that happened in where, the first two players nominated were Trevor Lawrence and then Lamar Jackson. They both went for low 70 mil. All the other quarterbacks in that kind of tier were 80 to 90 mil plus. So that just shows you the value in those first two. That's not, like I said, that's not the only example. Because I was tracking Tyreek Hill as one of the first wide receivers off the board. He went for $58 million. Then here are other wide receivers who went for more for the exact same contract length. All right. So we have Deandre Hopkins went for 58.5. Calvin Ridley went for 63. DJ Moore went for 60.5. Terry McLaurin went for 65.5. So, I mean, I just read off all those names and you're like, wouldn't you rather have Tyreek Hill straight up over all of them? Now take a $5 to $7 million discount on them. And it's just like, so that is honestly my biggest takeaway is to just be aggressive earlier because those are really where the values are as these players and people, actual managers get a feel for how much these guys are going to cost.
Yeah, if you don't have a good feel for what the market's going to be, the only way to really know it is to watch it play out. And sometimes you miss out. I'll like into perspective too, and you did a great job. You actually stole my notes a little bit, but Lamar ended up going, I believe they all went for 4 years. I had to double check, but as far as this value this year, Lamar actually went for less than all four of the other rookie quarterbacks and less than Tua because of just where he fell in, and people were kind of, I think not sure yet, how to, exactly how to attack that. So someone got a steal there. I put on here, Burrow was the last QB of the tier, which was hilarious. So he went same price as Patrick Mahomes, but you got your guy on a 4 year. So, I mean, that's at the end of the day, you don't, like you said, you don't have quarterbacks that look like mine. And then the three, this was the other thing I thought was just hilarious. They ended up being the first three wide receivers nominated was Tyreek Hill, Justin Jefferson, and Stephon Diggs. Now they all didn't go for the same length of contract, but just with their value of what that owner is paying, they all went to the same owner. And so again, Hill, Jefferson, and Diggs all went to the same owner. And for what their value is just in this upcoming season for 2021, Hill is the wide receiver 10, Jefferson is wide receiver 11, and Stephon Diggs is wide receiver 13. So he's paying low-end one prices for, you could argue, three of the top five wide receivers in 2021. So it's always, and the longer your contracts, the more the money's spread out and, that helps. But man, it definitely, I've noticed as well. I think that's a great takeaway, Addison. Being aggressive can definitely pay off. We saw, a couple instances in which people kind of got a little out of whack. I think CeeDee Lamb went for someone's paying him $6 million more than any other wide receiver this year, I think. But most of the time it paid off to be aggressive. And there were a couple teams that did that. And man, I kind of like where they're at. But
we talked about the one team before we jumped on here. The team that went super aggressive and
we really need to talk about this team.
Yeah. When I went into this, I thought the way to do it was to be conservative and okay, obviously you don't want to blow all your money right away. Well, this guy came in and, before I'm pretty sure before I even spent a dime of my salary.
Well, I think Jake, you and one other team were waited the longest. Yeah. I think we actually even took a break or maybe even two. It was over an hour in, and there was a team that hadn't spent $1, and this guy was already picked up.
I think we should also talk about his team as well. I think there's two teams that we need to talk about, and it's the one that we're about to, and then Gronkomania, I think, is that other team that was the last team to spend. So I think we should talk about both those teams because they're both really, really interesting in terms of how they attack this.
All right, Jake, you take the first one. This is the guy that spent all his money in the first hour.
Yeah. So what do we get to start out with? It's 182 million or something.
Yeah. So for notes for you guys out there, if you want to start a league on RSO, the RSO salary cap is set by the NFL salary cap. They really do try to mirror this site with the NFL salary cap. So it was 182.5 million for this year. So go for it, man.
So an hour into the draft, he's down to $11 million. I'm pretty sure.
Yes.
So he got that killer deal on Lamar Jackson, 70.5 million, 4 years. And then Christian McCaffrey goes right for him, goes right for Saquon Barkley after that. AJ Brown, Dak Prescott, so quarterbacks, Dak and Lamar, Calvin Ridley, CeeDee Lamb, Antonio Gibson. And then he checked out for a while and came back.
he clocked out for like 3 hours.
Yeah. Just literally.
He took a nap. He got some food.
Ran some errands, got it all done. It wasn't, his next player wasn't Devontae Parker and then McCole Hardman, Darius Slayton. But you could argue with the firepower that he came out with just from being aggressive, and he did get some solid deals on those contracts, even though he paid out the butt for the best players. I mean, it's the best roster, right?
Did you say that he got Calvin Ridley?
Yeah, I did.
You did? I remember I was in on that auction because I remember seeing that he was at the top of the list. I'm like, wait a minute. I was like, we can't let this guy get Calvin Ridley. I'm like, why are we allowing this? And then eventually I chickened out and then he got him. But like, I'm looking at his roster and I'm like, okay, like if this guy literally skirts by without injury, he's set. But if he does have an injury, who's his RB3? If Gibson or Saquon get hurt, who's he starting?
He's looking at Keyshawn Vaughn, Royce Freeman, and Jalen Richard. Like,
so bye weeks are really going to hurt, and injuries are really going to hurt. Yeah, but it's an interesting build.
The other thing to note with this that helped us, I think, a little bit, and by us, I mean everyone else in the league from not getting just curb stomped in year one, was the fact that even with those guys that he had, again, Lamar and Dak, McCaffrey, Saquon, Ridley, Lamb, AJ Brown, and Antonio Gibson as in a flex spot, he still had a tight end, and this is tight end premium. He did not get a tight end with all that money, and he didn't have a second flex spot yet. So he's still having to start two guys on peanut contracts from that, despite all the studs. I mean, this was definitely the most aggressive stars and scrubs approach I've ever seen in one of these formats. And I mean, it was insane. I'll add one more comment to this. I'll kick it back to you guys. It was hilarious. This thing, again, PSA, the startup auction takes about, I said 6 or 7. It ended up taking about 7 to 8 hours. So we did this all night, and it was hilarious because this guy, he told me he didn't do this just to get away. He said this was a strategy, but we're on the Zoom call. We're about an hour in, and his like wife or significant other walks by. In the background, you hear, she's like, "Are you still doing that thing?" We're like, we all laugh
there
because it's like he definitely didn't tell her that this was going to be an 8-hour ordeal. But yeah, it was definitely an interesting team. Addison, do you have any thoughts? And then we'll talk about this other team that was the last to spend.
I went into the schedule. Would anybody like to take a guess as to who he plays in week 1?
Well, I have it in front of me.
Jake, buddy.
Yeah, Jake, you're gonna get an L here.
I was hoping you weren't gonna
0-1.
I was hoping you weren't gonna ask me because I forgot who you were talking about.
Yeah,
the team that's stacked that won't be worrying about bye weeks in week 1. That's what you face.
You're starting out 0-1. I'm sorry, buddy.
Yeah, are you kidding me, man? Well, it doesn't matter because my quarterback's not starting, so that's convenient.
All right, so I have this other. Does anyone else have the Gronkomania team up? So this is the team that picked last. Does anybody have it?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So again, this was the guy that picked he picked last, and he actually walked away with, I believe, the most money left. He had almost $12 million left on his team. So there he has a lot of cap space he did not spend, which can be a strategy in this because he has going to have more money in future years too, because he doesn't have as much committed. But yeah, Addison, why don't you roll through what his team looks like?
Yeah. And I thought this was really interesting because I was going through the entire auction and I was like, this guy's still at like 182 mil and everybody else is like in 5 figures right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so, and his approach was interesting too, because he waited and he's almost the equivalent of the guy in your startup snake draft that just trades down and has like 17 picks between rounds 4 through 9. Mm-hmm. And like, that's all he did. So his team is Baker Mayfield and Matthew Stafford at quarterback and Superflex. He's got J.K. Dobbins and Aaron Jones, Cooper Kupp, Chris Godwin, Julio Jones, Mark Andrews, John Brown, and Cortland Sutton. Those are that's his starting lineup at least. And then he kind of filled out with backup running backs and Laviska Shenault and a couple other tight ends and stuff. So it was interesting because, you know, on the complete opposite of what the guy who he was literally done in an hour and spent all of his money in an hour, he waited like an hour and a half and then literally ripped off like 10 players in a row that he bought, or at least was in on. And then he seemed like he was just in on everybody else, for the rest of the night, was always in on there. So I thought that was really interesting. And it was just really cool to see two completely different approaches to this, and going completely studs and duds, and then going all, 2s and 3s, I guess, is what you could kind of look at that as. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was definitely interesting because he was just waiting. And then, like you said, he just was going through and ripping off players. The thing that when I looked back at this, he took Mark Andrews, and this is tight end premium. So he definitely has that edge compared to the other team. But, so he doesn't have like necessarily a weak spot. Like John Brown right now is in his lineup, but you could put Chenault there. He spent the money that way that he would be a starter. But it was funny because I don't know that his bench is overly deep either. He took Kenyon Drake. He has J.D. McKissick, Gronk. So I mean, like and Hayden Hurst. So he has more depth than the other team. But it was just really interesting to see how those teams definitely shaked out because they were on the opposite ends there. Jake, you were the second to last team to spend money. You were sitting on $182.5 million for a very, very long time. We were giving you shit in the Zoom chat nonstop, waiting for you to do something. So why don't we start with your team? We'll go through our individual teams and kind of just go through then what our strategy was. So as the guy that waited the second longest to spend money, how did your team shake out, and what do you like, what do you don't like about how your team ended up?
I didn't hate it in general for going into it feeling like, and I guess leaving it feeling like I didn't really know what I was doing.
Leaving it that you didn't feel like,
yeah, sort of. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I feel like I would never leave with this roster in a redraft league, mostly because when it snakes around you in a redraft league, you kind of have like that tier of players or like that handful of guys. I don't know how I'm trying to say this, but like in that group of guy, you have your guy that you're going to pick. Whereas in an auction, it's all completely random. And then, for example, like DeAndre Swift, he's not a guy that I'm 100% in on redraft this year. I think Jamal Williams is going to be involved. I don't love the whole Detroit offensive situation as a whole. But when it got to the point, like with Addison and Joe Burrow, where it kind of hits the end of a tier, you kind of panic, and it's like, I got to make a move on DeAndre Swift. Thus, the DeAndre Swift 4 years. And then I get another guy who I wouldn't ever think I would have on one of my redraft teams, in David Montgomery. Just again, I guess I would call that the end of a tier, being that the tier of guys that I at least expect to get the ball on a regular basis.
Well, I'll add this too, as you're going through the rest of your team. Like, I ended up with Najee Harris and Alvin Kamara, which were like two of the first handful of running backs off the board. And it was funny because now I'm sitting there like, my God, I hope that I set the market right and these guys aren't going for super deals, because I'm not going to be in now on those running backs. So like you can definitely kind of price check it a little bit and things. But as I was watching, like, I know Swift was the one for sure. I'm like, man, I hope he doesn't go for cheap. And he it kind of took a while, and eventually he got there. And I think they were all about even between the three of them. But man, it can be just as nerve wracking on the opposite side after you've bought players, to just see how the market shapes out. So you got Montgomery and Swift as your two running backs here. How did the rest of your team shake out?
You know what? Fine and dandy with the DK Metcalf pick. I was feeling kind of high and mighty after that one. I like DK Metcalf for 4 years, $70 million. Follow that up with Keenan Allen, Chase Claypool, a little Adam Thielen on a 1-year deal, Rashad Bateman. I feel like I got a little bit of age on my team, and then I feel like I got some younger guys on the end with Rashad Bateman, Kadarius Toney, Brian Edwards, De'Ami Brown, Anthony Ferkser, which I'm just hoping can be something at this point in that offense. But all in all, I'm not disappointed with it. If I could do it all again, I would have done it the aggressive style that Mr. Lamar Jackson, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley. That's the team I wanted, but sitting back conservatively and just kind of waiting for whatever fell to me, and then kind of overpaying for that. Again, not totally disappointed with the team, but I feel like it could have went better. And I definitely adjust the strategy going into it for the second time around.
Yeah, I thought overall your team ended up pretty good. You have really strong, like, your receivers are really strong in this format. Even with the contracts, Allen, Claypool, and Metcalf obviously stud 3 wide receivers, and then you still have Lockett and Thielen in the flexes, and like Addison alluded to earlier, like the fact I don't like Adam Thielen a whole ton, but on a 1-year contract for, pretty low end money, like, compared to, he went for $11.5 million this year. That's got to be low end 2 money, I would guess, without looking all the way through, but definitely interesting.
I wanted to ask you guys, and Addison, you spoke to it a little bit ago about like allocating the contracts, like the league we did. I think we set it up for you can offer 2 4-year deals, 4 3-year deals, 4 2-year deals, and then like a bunch of 1-year deals, right?
Yep.
Correct. Is that like pretty standard?
I've done, I think like the recommendation from the RSO guys, and again, you guys can, if you're playing around with this, you can do as many as you want. So in the 2 other RSO leagues that I've done in the past, actually it's been less multi-year contracts, which just creates more turnover. So it was more like half of that. I think there were like 6 combined multi-year contracts in the other leagues I've done. So even though I had experience in this, we had more multi-year contracts. So then I was like, man, and I wish I would have spent more time on this, is that I didn't really put a ton of thought into like how I'm going to use those. Like I knew I definitely went through and I knew the players, like here's the group that I want to spend 4 years on, 3-year contracts, 2-year contracts. Like I did that, but I wasn't as looking back on it. Like I wish I would have said like, I want at least one young QB on a 4-year contract. Instead, as we'll get to, like my 2 quarterbacks are Jared Goff and Matt Ryan, and I have them on 2-year deals. So like, even if they do get me through the next 2 seasons, like I got to figure out my quarterback longer term, as a lot of these younger guys are all on 4-year contracts, and I'm not going to see them in the player pool for a while. I'm going to have to trade for them or figure out some rookies. So
yeah, I screwed up royally with my contract because I didn't realize until the end of the draft that I still had a 3-year deal to offer somebody, and that hung around until I gave a 3-year deal to Josh Palmer for 3 years, $65 million or $6 million.
$6 million. I mean, that's not bad. I mean,
I did not give him $65 million. I mean, I'm new at this. Come on.
It was Palmer when that was it happened to another team. There was another team that took Terrence Marshall. I think he got him for like $7 million, but over 3 years. So like he has him extremely, extremely cheap. So you can definitely go that route in these types of leagues too. I've seen guys do that where they use the multi-years on cheaper contracts, and that way they're not as committed. But in this, there were so many multi-year contracts, it was really tough to do. So
yeah, and I did not do it on purpose. It was just it was just a boneheaded move.
That always makes it more fun. Addison, how did your team shake out, and what did you like? What did you not like?
Yeah, so we can bypass Joe Burrow's contract and price, but I also have, like I said before, Tom Brady on a 2-year deal, and then I rounded out my quarterback room because this is super flex with and I really like this. I ended up kind of targeting Mac Jones on a 4-year deal as my last 4-year guy, because in my mind I was like, these rookies really only make sense on 3 or 4-year deals. Like I didn't really like to just say, well, if I get Mac Jones for 1 year, what is that going to get me? Because I don't think he's going to be that great in 2021. I need to give him time to develop. Otherwise, he's just wasting, salary cap on my bench all year and not doing anything. So it ended up, as we moved kind of down throughout the rest of the auction, that I was really going to target Mac Jones as my QB3 on a 4-year deal and see what happens and go with that. And it was pretty cheap too. It was 4 for, what is that, $9 million? Is that what I have on there? Yeah.
Yeah. So it was like it was roughly $10 million a year for 4 years though. But the thing was like, because I noted that was one of my favorite contracts out of the auction. Cause like you said, you locked him in for 4 years, even if he's a low end 2, that's low end 2 money and you have him locked in. That's a valuable piece right there. So I liked how your quarterbacks ended up, even as much as we were poking fun of the Burrow contract, you're not left without a paddle type of thing, man. I think you ended up with a good plan there.
Right. Yeah. And then my wide receiver room is also pretty strong. I got A-Rob on a 3-year deal, Michael Thomas on a 2, Mike Evans on a 3, and Robert Woods on a 2. So I really like just kind of, and that's just my general dynasty build, is I like to just hammer out 4 or 5, really strong wide receivers, kind of being fluid depending on if it's a start 2 versus start 3. This is start 3. So I wanted to make sure I had at least those 3. And then I really prioritized, trying to get at least a 4th one in there for bye weeks and then also as a flex play. So I really, kind of went after that. And then just the way that wide receivers just in general seemed a little bit deeper. And when we got to kind of the end of the auction overall, Jarvis Landry, I kind of spent up for him. I didn't really mean to. It just kind of happened. Sterling Shepard, Jacoby Myers, just taking shots on what those guys could potentially be. I don't know how this happened, but I snagged Tyrell Williams as like one of the last players in the auction. And I was like, I saw that he was like player 370 or something on their RSO ranking. So he got buried hardcore from anybody's, perspective. And then I was like, okay, we're at the point where everybody's throwing out your player. You win them for the minimum and then you move on to the next one. So I was like, Tyrell Williams for men. Okay, we'll see what happens. So I was glad I was able to do that. And I figured I got your approval on that one, Kyle.
Yeah, because Jake said he made a mistake about not realizing he had a 3-year deal. Like I was messing around and I had not put my calculation of my number of roster spots was off. So I had Tyrell like written down elsewhere. I was like, hey, this is a guy that if I'm going to nominate and try to get him for min, but even if someone else does, I'll jump it to $1 million and I'll be fine with that, like for 1 year. And then I had screwed around on another player. I forgot to mark him on the tracking sheet I was using. And so I was a player short, or I thought I had an extra roster spot in essence. And so by the time I finished my roster, I was like, shoot, I didn't get Tyrell Williams. And then I was hoping that he would just make his way into the free agent pool. But I think Addison, you and another team were probably just in there by yourselves for the last like 10 minutes because you guys had a lot of roster spots to fill. And I saw that you got him for the minimum. I was like, damn it. that was a good get too. So
send me a second rounder. You can have him.
Oh, thanks. Did you overall, did you like how that panned out just as your team as a whole?
Yeah, I did. My running back room is kind of iffy, but then again, that's just kind of my general strategy. Is I like to get kind of a stud to just have as my anchor, and then kind of stream out the rest of the RB2 spot, and maybe have one or another that could potentially fill in as a flex, depending on how injuries go. So I got Nick Chubb on a 3. I kind of went hard on Myles Gaskin as well, and then.
Yeah,
Mike
baby.
Davis.
Yeah, baby.
I got Mike Davis pretty hard because and I think everybody else noticed that because it was like we're going through all this whole entire list of all these running backs and it's like, okay, who's the last, like literally the last one? Like Latavius Murray's already gone. Like all these other like
we were like
Pollard's
2 tiers
gone.
past.
Ronald Jones is gone. And then it's like, wait, Mike Davis is still out there. So I was like purposely trying to save money because I was like, all right, I need to get like into at least 10 mil for Mike Davis, and he got bumped all the way up. I got into another freaking auction war, and I have it for 19 mil.
I was definitely in that auction war for a minute. And to put that in perspective, you got him for 1 year, 19 mil. That Derrick Henry.
Stop.
Derrick Henry, 4 million less.
Stop.
So
that's what I mean. Be aggressive early, so then you don't have to overpay later.
That was the funny thing too, because Addison wasn't in the Zoom call, but there was a team that was in the Zoom call, and he didn't have any running backs, like he had none. And I'm just watching Mike Davis's name just still sitting in there. I'm like, who's going to nominate and start this disaster? Because we were clearly beyond the point where he should have been left over, especially in this, because you're not drafting him in a dynasty, right? And whoever got him could have easily put him on a 1 year and felt really, really good about his value this season. That's exactly what happened. But it just kept going and going and going and going and going. And so I think he's got to be the 3rd highest paid running back this year. But again, that it's different because you only handcuffed to him for this season. So
the way I look at it as the positive is I'm going to have a ton of cap space next year.
There you go. Exactly.
I'm going to be in some free agents next year. So we'll see how that goes.
I definitely liked how your team panned out. That was definitely a team that I liked quite a bit. Your quarterback situation was awesome. Again, Burrow, but then Tom Brady with Mac Jones waiting in the wing there was really, really good. My team overall, I'll just touch on it real quick. My general strategy is like I like to remain kind of balanced. I don't like spending a ton of money in these. Just like I like to have everybody, even my best guys, around under 20 million, right? Which is usually like I'm not going to have a guy contract wise, inside the top 5 at a position, right? I'm usually going to be closer towards, 10 to 12. So how this ended up for me, I got absolutely hosed on quarterbacks. I waited too long. I missed the Joe Burrow tier. Then the rest of those tiers just kept falling away, and I got absolutely crapped on. So this was before the Julio trade. I got Matt Ryan, which I felt okay about at the time. Now I hate it. So I have Matt Ryan and Jared Goff on 2-year contracts, and then I had to overspend later on Ryan Fitzpatrick as my third QB because I didn't have any confidence in my first two guys. So I ended up paying Fitzpatrick almost as much as I'm paying Goff and Ryan, but he's only on a 1 year. So there's that. My running backs are pretty solid. I paid Kamara and Najee Harris. I feel like I got them on multi-year contracts. I had a pretty decent clip, so I felt pretty good about that. And then I got was it Naeem Hines, like extremely cheap. I got Leonard Fournette and David Johnson pretty cheap. So I felt like I got some solid players there at running back. Wide receivers where I spent a 4-year contract on Jerry Jeudy, but at relatively good value. So I felt decent about that. T. Higgins on a multi-year contract. And then the guy
on Higgins, I was so mad at you.
that was the player I got in a bidding war on. I'm like, I am not losing this player. So I paid quite a bit for him, but I got him on a 3-year.
How much did you get for Higgins?
I paid him 47.5 over 3. So 14, 15 million this year. I'll have to take a look at your roster, Jake, because there was another player. It was Higgins and Claypool were both like the last 2 young guys that I thought were worth like a lot of money. So I got Higgins first, and I tried to get Claypool too, but you freaking took him. So
yeah, you and I were going at it on that one. But I think I saw, so T. Higgins went for 47.5. That's over 3 years. I was gonna say Jamar Chase, I think, went for 4 years, but it was 80 million or something like that.
Yeah,
it was a big one.
Yeah, there was a couple guys that kind of the opposite of that of the Lamar deals where I was like, man, that's hefty. But and I ended up sort of wrap this team. I got George Kittle. I spent I thought it was okay. Like I was actually only like 4 million overall more than Pitts. So I was like, I'm good with that for Kittle and multi-year. So my team ends up being my Matt Ryan, Jared Goff, Kamara, and Najee Harris, T. Higgins, Juju Smith-Schuster, Jerry Jeudy. I got Amari Cooper on a 2-year deal. Tyler Boyd, who I own in every single league. And if I own Tyler Boyd, then I automatically also have to own Juju. So that completed the Infinity Stones for me. Just ridiculous. And then I got stuck with Will Fuller trying to be a price checker. But he's all right. And then I got Evan Ingram super, super cheap too, because it was late in the draft. So overall, my quarterbacks are trash. So I got some work to do. But again, I definitely went with a strategy of, spending those multi-years on young players. But if I had to do it again, I would have spent those multi-years on young quarterbacks because now I got some work to do in this thing. So those are our teams. Hopefully you guys have some good takeaways. I know I don't like talking about my own team too often, but in this auction, it just makes it so interesting because it's not just who falls to you, it's who you want to go get, what your strategy was. So as we kind of put a bow on this discussion, what were there, and you kind of mentioned it through the show as well, but what were some final takeaways? Any advice you would give people as they are considering whether it's RSO or just other auctions? Like, what's some advice you might give people? We'll start with Addison.
Be aggressive early. I feel like we freaking said that like 15 times. No, seriously, if you're interested in salary cap or auction, this is a fantastic format to really get in because, and especially the RSO one specifically, because it's kind of a unique blend where it's not really dynasty because we're not keeping everybody year over year, but you keep enough of your roster. We're keeping, I think, about a third, maybe a little more, a little less, something about that. But you get franchise tags as well, one franchise tag per year. And then, like we mentioned, you get 2 4 years and then 4, 3, and 2 years and then unlimited ones. But that renews every year. So next year, every team gets an additional 2 4-year deals. Your rookie drafts and stuff like that is just a typical rookie draft, and contracts and salaries are priced as if they were in the NFL, stuff like that. So this is really, really unique because like I said, it's not dynasty per se. It's not redraft, and it's more than just your standard 1, 2, 3 keeper league as well. So it's got a lot of moving parts and a lot of different strategies and ways to attack this stuff. And I thought it was really, really fun. And I would definitely recommend, if you're into any of this, going to and doing it on RSO. Don't mess with MFL. Don't mess with Fantrax. Don't mess with any of that stuff. for salaries and contracts, because RSO I think is the way to go about it.
There you go. That's good stuff. Jake, what was any takeaways, advice as not only your first ever auction, but diving right into RSO, which, as Addison's alluded to, is pretty deep stuff. So thoughts?
No, yeah, Addison pretty much hit the nail on the head. I mean, that was my main takeaway. Is next time I'm doing this, I'm going all in on the first couple of rounds worth of players. You know, I want to come out of there with some real golden ticket type players. So that's my main takeaway. You know what? My second main takeaway to if you're gonna go all nighter and do this in one night, I would prep the coffee before you start. And maybe I'll stick with that as my main takeaway.
I'll definitely say, and again, just like I love this format. These are my favorite leagues. I started one last year because we were in quarantine and like was looking for something to do. So glad that I did that last year. It was my first experience as the commissioner. The site is pretty commissioner friendly, even if you're doing it for the first time. But the guys over at RSO, I've reached out to them on Twitter. Check out their handle. They have their own show that they touch on this stuff pretty in depth, but they do a great job giving you guys tips and things on how to use their platform. Their FAQ is awesome. So I definitely recommend you taking a look at that. But it does take a really, really long time to do it because it's live and you need everybody there. So I've done it where you can pause it and like overnight and get back to it, but you need everybody in the room. So it's really, really tough. So all the guys that
pause it.
Yes. Yeah. We paused it a bunch. We paused it a bunch.
Every like 30 minutes. We're doing a pause real quick.
Yeah. I got a little crazy, but,
we're in like the 16th round of players. I'm like, can we please not pause?
Finally, I was like, man, I'm not stopping this anymore. Like, we just need to go. And it went a little bit late, but real quick, last thing, because I do think it's worth mentioning. Addison, did you kind of mentioned it, but were you tracking contracts as it was going?
I still have the sheet. I have a sheet with every contract in terms of salary and the total amount. I did not, and that's why I asked you. I did not track the order that they were nominated, which I really wish I did. And I only really have it just based off of memory in terms of remembering that Lawrence and Jackson were early, and then Tyreek and Diggs were early. And that's the only thing that I wish I did. But I have a sheet of years and total salary. So gotcha. I do have that.
Yeah, I have. I use a similar thing. We've talked about it enough, but like tier your guys out ahead of time. Cause like for me, when I do any auction, I always tier those guys out. I usually put a price, what I think that tier is going to be worth. That way I kind of know what to spend. But I think Addison did a great job, being his first RSO auction. Like that's something that I do. I make sure as we go through the auction, I'm putting prices next to those guys so that when somebody that I have ranked within a spot or two comes up, I kind of know like, okay, this is what this other guy went for. And you can kind of gauge like, okay, am I bidding too much here? And can I get out on this guy and go to the next guy in the tier? Or if you're in that Burrow situation where it's like, nope, this is it. It's do or die. And sometimes you just have to put a little bit of extra money there and then balance your budget out ahead of time. Or later on as you go, like, all right, I'm 5 million over on this spot. I gotta cut somewhere else. So that's good stuff. I highly recommend that if you can do it. Keep track of the contracts or prices as you go through. So
yep. Yeah, it's definitely helpful. Because like I said, you get to the point where you're like, because I did that actually. TJ Hawkinson was the first player that I won. And we already had a couple of the tight ends go off. Travis Kelce, George Kittle went off. And TJ Hawkinson was there, and I already knew what the other guys went for. And I was like, okay, I can take it up to this point, because I feel like that's a good difference between the two that kind of showcases the difference in value. So I did that for everybody, and I was doing that the entire time. And that's why I was just like, we got to some of these players and I'm like, okay, why is Terry McLaurin going for, $7 million more than Tyreek Hill? Like that's not, but that's, again, that's like the motto of tonight is just these early guys are values.
Nature of the beast for sure. But Jake, any parting thoughts on this? Any notes for the people as we put a bow on this auction discussion?
No, sir. But I'm excited to talk about some wide receiver action next week.
Yeah, we're going to be diving into some wide receiver strategy. We talked zero RB last week. Hopefully this encourages you guys to do some auction stuff. And last but not least, Addison, you mentioned to me, so I don't know how public this is, I guess, but are you willing to share? Are you doing some DLF content around this?
Yes. Yeah. So my plan is to do an auction type strategy video for DLF on DLF's YouTube channel. And it's going to kind of be centered around this whole entire draft that we just did. So if you listen to this, it's probably just going to be the same thing of early guys or values. But yeah, definitely if you want more of this kind of content, just from my straight alone perspective, DLF's YouTube channel, on top of just being an awesome source for dynasty content with a lot of different people, not just me, from other DLF guys as well on there, dropping content basically every single day, Monday through Friday. So yeah, DLF's YouTube channel.
Yeah, I highly recommend it. Addison and the guys over at DLF do a really good job. I always tune into those when I get a chance. So I'll be looking forward to checking that one out as well. As he talks a little RSO, a little bit of auction here. Was glad to be a part of this little guinea pig league. So definitely recommend you guys check this out. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter at KyleMonth8. Again, check out the RSO handle and the team over there. You can follow Jake on Twitter at JakeTakesFF. Follow Addison at AmazeHaze_. And I did see some reviews over on Apple Podcasts that even called out this very show, Jake. The people are liking what we're doing here. So we're doing something right. All right. With that, boys, you guys take it easy. We'll be back with some wide receiver discussion next week. And stay subscribed for more from the Warzone Network later on this week. See you guys later.